street is quite clear. This building was, this was 248 East 82nd Street. It was much closer to 2nd Avenue than to 1st Avenue. I'm sorry, than to 3rd Avenue. And it was unusual in that, probably because it was so close to the main thoroughfare, it actually had a restaurant on the ground floor, which was owned by a fellow by the name of Reichmann, who it obviously was some kind of Austrian or German or something like that. And he owned this, this restaurant, may have even been a Hungarian restaurant, but it was a restaurant on the 1st floor. We went up one flight of stairs. On the 2nd floor was the local union headquarters of the, what I guess we would call the Teamsters. We called them beer drivers.
Beer drivers.
Beer drivers, but I guess they were probably Teamster local, Teamster Union local. And so there were always lots of people going up to that because they had various things that had to be taken care of at the Union Hall. On the next floor, which we would call this, which we always call the 2nd floor. In other countries that would be called the 3rd floor, but it was called the 2nd floor, was where Reichmann lived himself in that apartment. And on the top floor, we lived. And there was a backyard, which was actually during the summer occupied by tables and so forth of Reichmann and the restaurant down there. So this was kind of, in some ways, a multi-use building, commercial things and residential. I have no idea who owned it, but we rented it. And looking out, and so in the middle were a couple of rooms with no windows. There was, in the kitchen, you looked out over the restaurant down there. On the other side, of course, you looked out over 82nd Street. And, you know, my first recollection of that was when Joan was born. And then when Debbie was born. In fact, I remember very well when Debbie was, this I remember quite vividly, when she was brought home from the hospital after being born. So that's where we lived. There was one large, relatively, you know, none of it was large, but what we called the big bedroom. There was another bedroom where Sol and Ruth and the baby would be sleeping. And there was a kind of a small living room in which we had a couch and chairs and so forth. And there was a kitchen which was big enough for us to eat in. It was quite noisy. I particularly remember the 3rd Avenue L, most especially in the summer, going by because the windows were open. And so you could hear the L going by. And being on the 3rd floor, I remember it in the summer being extremely hot, or at least I felt that it was very hot. The noise from the restaurant, which was below, and the 3rd Avenue L, and there was always a lot of street noise, most especially from 2nd Avenue where trucks were rumbling through all the time. So I remember it being quite a noisy and often smelly place because all the smells from the kitchen and the food and everything were going up. And of course it was on the 3rd floor, so naturally this heat was quite intense, or at least I remember it. So, and being